Welcome to This Explainer. I'm so glad you're joining us today because we are diving into a seriously fascinating topic. The U.S. Marshals. Now, you know those Hollywood movies with the crazy high-speed chases and dramatic rooftop shootouts? Yeah, scratch that. Today, we're stripping all of that away. We're going to look at the real, deeply methodical, and incredibly structured process of fugitive apprehension in the USA. It's an absolute masterclass in patience and procedure, and honestly, it's far more captivating than fiction. So, how long do you think you could stay completely hidden? I really want you to imagine the immense psychological weight of trying to just disappear in modern America without leaving a single digital or physical footprint. No credit cards, no phone calls, no social media whatsoever. It sounds basically impossible, right? Well, as we're about to see, the inability to completely erase that footprint is exactly what investigators rely on. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for climbing the escalation ladder of pursuit. First up, the U.S. Fugitive Hunters. Then, Tier 1, the amateurs. After that, Tier 2, the threats, followed by Tier 3, the ghosts. And finally, we'll wrap up with the inescapable reality of life on the run, the losing arithmetic. All right, Section 1, the U.S. Fugitive Hunters, the baseline. A manhunt usually doesn't kick off with some criminal mastermind. It actually typically starts when a totally mundane local charge suddenly gets bumped up to a federal level, which shifts the entire weight of the justice system. And while there are plenty of federal agencies in the USA with really broad purviews, the U.S. Marshal Service is totally unique. Catching fugitives isn't just a side project for them, it's their primary dedicated mission. If a failure to appear in court becomes a federal matter or a warrant involves federal jurisdiction, they inherit the case. This is specifically what they exist to do. And as you can see here, the Marshals systematically scale their approach based entirely on the target. There's a direct correlation between the tier of the fugitive, the actual threat level they pose, and the investigative methods they deploy. A low-level bail jumper? That mostly gets paperwork and phone calls. But an extreme threat fugitive on the most wanted list? That triggers the whole shebang: tactical risk assessments, thermal imaging, and massive informant networks. They match the tactic perfectly to the exact threat. Moving on to Section 2, Tier 1, the amateurs, leaving a traceable footprint. So this first tier is mostly low-level offenders. Think bail jumpers who just skipped a court date or parole absconders who cut an ankle monitor. And it might surprise you, but these individuals actually make up the vast majority of cases the Marshals handle. At these initial levels, the investigation is heavily paperwork-driven. Deputies are pulling last-known addresses, checking vehicle registrations, calling defense attorneys, and a lot of these cases actually resolve with a simple phone call negotiating a surrender. But for folks like parole absconders, the tactic shifts to something deliberately low-tech but super effective: the unannounced in-person visit. Deputies will interview friends and family, specifically looking for involuntary physical reactions. A quick unconscious glance toward a back room, or just a slight hesitation before answering a question, that often reveals way more than the actual words spoken. But hey, let's say the fugitive actually decides to make a run for it. Unlawful flight across U.S. state lines makes it a federal offense. And here's the really fascinating psychological angle. Fugitives vastly underestimate how much our daily lives rely on a digital footprint. It's usually just an everyday act that brings them down. Swiping a debit card for gas 3 states away, combined with a powered-off cell phone that still randomly pings a local tower, that's the fatal mistake. Within hours, the Marshals use those 2 tiny data points to narrow a massive multi-state hunt down to one single town. Which brings us to Section 3, Tier 2, the threats, when priority shifts to safety. Now we're dealing with violent offenders who have prior records or sex offender registry violators. And here, the whole operational pace and strategy fundamentally changes. Finding you? That's only half the problem now. For these threats, the priority shifts completely from pure speed to absolute safety. If a file shows a pattern of resisting arrest, deputies aren't just going to go kick down a door the second they spot the target. No way! They'll sit back and watch a location for days to really understand their routines. They're assessing the environment. Are there kids around? What time of day minimizes uncontrolled encounters? They meticulously plan the approach to minimize risk to the arresting teams and to innocent bystanders. And for sex offenders, we see this really fascinating cross-jurisdictional challenge. Because registration laws vary so wildly across the USA, just crossing a state border can instantly turn a fugitive who is technically compliant in state A into a severe violator in state B. Fugitives sometimes try to exploit those loopholes, which forces the marshals to maintain incredibly detailed knowledge of neighboring state laws. They're constantly running regional sweeps and leveraging community tip lines to meticulously track these cross-jurisdictional inconsistencies. All right, Section 4, Tier 3, the ghosts, from multi-state to international. Now we are entering the realm of the true ghosts. These are the fugitives who have managed to evade capture for months, sometimes even decades. We're talking the most wanted list, international flights across borders, completely cold cases. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive escalation in technology and resources deployed at this tier. The Investigative Operations Division steps in and goes all out. They use predictive modeling, analyzing hometown ties and past jobs to actually rank likely relocation spots. If someone gets picked up on a minor charge under a fake name, routine biometric fingerprint checks will flag them instantly. Out in rural areas, aircraft use aerial thermal imaging to literally spot heat signatures through dense forest canopies, guiding specially trained canine scent tracking units on the ground. They even deliberately engineer media campaigns, perfectly timing the release of photos to generate massive spikes in actionable public tips. But what happens if they flee the country entirely? Well, crossing an international border plunges the whole hunt into this agonizingly slow diplomatic sludge. The Marshals issue Interpol red notices and leverage attachés stationed at U.S. embassies. But the crazy thing is, even if they know exactly what city and street the fugitive is living on, capturing them can stall for literally years. It all depends on complicated extradition treaties and navigating foreign court proceedings.
But even for the ultimate ghosts, the ones who disappeared decades ago and built entirely new identities, the past is finally catching up with them. Investigators are heavily leaning into forensic genetic genealogy now. They match distant family DNA on consumer databases to uncover assumed identities. On top of that, they're retroactively applying facial recognition technology to old photographs, scanning current surveillance, and social media. People who have been safely hidden for 30 years are suddenly being placed in a specific city at a specific time, and it's all thanks to technology that didn't even exist when they first ran. It's wild.
And finally, Section 5, the losing arithmetic, how it actually ends. So the crucial point is, this brings us to the grand takeaway of this entire explainer. Because despite all that dramatic technology and those high-stakes chases, the way these cases actually end usually comes down to one single number, 1. Regardless of the tier, whether it's a 3-day hunt or a 30-year cold case, the actual capture is almost always super quiet and procedural. Why? Well, think about it. A fugitive has to maintain flawless, absolute discipline 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, indefinitely. But the U.S. Marshals, they only need the fugitive to slip up exactly one time. It's this inescapable mathematical reality of life on the run. As it says right here, every fugitive is fighting the same losing arithmetic, needing to be perfect every single day against an investigative apparatus that only needs to be right once. It's just a patient, methodical accumulation of small advantages by the investigators until the case simply closes itself. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. If you were on the run, fighting that losing arithmetic, what would be your one mistake? Would it be a moment of convenience, like a quick debit card swipe? Maybe the false security of a powered-off cell phone? Or would it just be the simple human need to make a call home? It's those mundane, everyday habits that we can never truly escape, and in the end, that is exactly how they catch you. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep feeding that curiosity.